You know, as the game progresses forward, we get an ever-gleaming picture of what's really happened in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago. And while some of the more radical among us might say nothing happened in Khaenri'ah 500 years ago, I strongly rebuke those claims, because I'm not a monster. I accept something happened fervently, might I add, and while my perspective on things may differ to most, ultimately, many questions still remain that we all don't know the answers to right now, with the most prominent being, who is to blame for the Khaenri'ah disaster? As it stands right now, it seems like you can adopt one of either three candidates. The first being Khaenri'ah itself, the second, the heavenly principles, and the third, the abyss. Over time, we've received different answers as to what contributed to the downfall of Khaenri'ah. Some say the gods.
Later events unfolded just as you remember. It was all destroyed by gods.
Some say Khaenri'ah itself.
That man, dainsleif, was the Twilight Sword, one of the royal guards of the final dynasty of Khaenri'ah. 500 years ago, he failed to prevent the destruction of Khaenri'ah.
Finally, some say the abyss.
Yet, deep within, the five of them craved something more. They could not resist the call of the abyss, and divided among themselves a power that could destroy the world.
But keep in mind, none of these sources state who or what's caused the actual disaster, but instead just mention the prominent figures before and after the cataclysm. Even in Dain's mention of the sinners, he doesn't really condemn them for causing the disaster, but rather for failing to aid Khaenri'ah when it's arrived.
And when the cataclysm occurred, not one of them stood up in defense of their nation. Not one came forward to prevent the tragedy, and for that, they shall never have my forgiveness.
The same goes for the sibiling. They also attack Dain for failing to prevent the disaster, and as for the actions of the gods in Celestia, that's still a bit murky. We all know they wound up destroying Khaenri'ah, but when? Because as it seems right now, Celestia didn't blast Khaenri'ah until after the disaster was over. Quote, the original calamity had been overturned, yet the island in the sky set the earth to burn. So, while not contradicting Dain's earlier statement that the gods laid waste to Khaenri'ah, it does provide more context as to the timeline. However, my friends, I believe there's something we can do to eliminate Celestia from being the initiators of the cataclysm, and it's this. Look at history. My peoples, I implore us. Khaenri'ah was founded around the same time as the fall of Salvan. Quote, I've heard of people who are building a new nation without gods. Perhaps they'll have the power to stand against this world. Now, given Salvan crumbled around the arrival of the divine nail, and these nails were distributed shortly after the war with the second who came, and Zhongli was said to be a young god around this time, that gives us a time span of roughly 5,500 years, which means Khaenri'ah existed for 5,500 years before our beloved sustainer of heavenly principles even glanced in their general direction. Now, why is that? I've been confused about something recently. I don't mean to get all Sharpton on some of you little niggas, but there comes a time in every man's life. If Celestia is as evil as some claim, then I beseech thee, why do all this? And what I mean is, why do all this? Why create the birds, the rivers, the mountains? Why create humanity? Why put an egg around the world to protect humanity if they hated them? Why nurture humanity? Why look after humanity? Why cast down those bitch-ass drug-addicted sovereigns? Why repel the abyss? Why fight forbidden knowledge if they hate humanity? Doubters? Anyone? Silence, huh? So how about instead of doubting and making baseless accusations about the divine, whilst the real monsters walk about among us, you get on your fucking knees and apologize. Say thank you to the greatest being who ever lived, the one who kickstarted all of this, the sovereign of sovereigns, the primordial one, a progenitor god hailing from beyond the stars. And to answer the question I asked, in my experience, the simplest answer tends to be the right one. I believe we've heard this before. Occam's razor, if you will. Quote, the primordial one had a sacred plan for humans. As long as they were happy, it too rejoiced. I urge you, brothers and sisters, to watch out for those who cause divisions and put obstacles in your way that are contrary to the teaching you have learned. Keep away from them, for such people are not serving our Lord the Primordial Lord, but their own appetites. By smooth talk and flattery, they deceive the minds of naive people. Romans 16, 17, 18. So with Celestia successfully removed from contention as the ones responsible for being the catalyst of the cataclysm, our attention must now turn to either Khaenri'ah itself or the Abyss. Now, as we know, these two entities were deeply intertwined with one another. Ermin using forbidden knowledge to spruce up his machines, the great sinners responding to the call of the Abyss, but among them, who broke the proverbial straw on the camel's back that kick-started a brutal war that plagued all of Teyvat? We don't know. However, I do want to point something out in defense of Khaenri'ah, and it's this. In spite of what a few people of great esteem were doing in the nation, when the disaster struck and the Abyss was running rampant through all of Teyvat, god damn it if they ain't have some motherfucking heroes that tried their best, man. Dainsleif, Halfdan, the Order to defend the citizens no matter what. I mean, hell, this Order was so present in the soldiers' minds, even 500 years later, they still protected the hilly churls. And Fortis Alberech taking over from that dumb fuck Ermin, evacuating the citizens topside. Man, there were some Khaenri'ahs that tried, man. They really did. But ultimately, as a nation, you reap what you sow. A nation prospers under the leadership of a few great men, and a nation falls under the leadership of a few great men. Sadly, we just don't know enough at this time to really state whether the sinners just sort of banded together to start the cataclysm, because we just don't know enough about their actions during the cataclysm. Literally, the most we know about is Rheindotter, who at some points made rift wolves, may have given rise to hordes, but then literally just popped back up after the cataclysm had ended and made the Albedos. This tells us nothing of her actions during the cataclysm, nor of the intent behind bringing life to these abominations. Even less can be said about the other sinners like Vedrfolnir and Sirtologi, and absolutely nothing can be said about Raptatir and Rarir of Salnari Rerir. Now, as for the Abyss, we again don't know much. One thing we do know about the Abyss, however, that seems to fly under the radar is that despite the Abyss being made up of mostly what at this point is the fucking Abyss Order, they did at one point have their own denizens, like the one who was guarding Vedrfolnir. However, given we know the crystal was just, Vedrfolnir, this lector could just be someone he went, come join me, I have a great plan in mind. So as to the question of who really started the cataclysm, the answer is a resounding not Celestia. In actuality, it feels like the game is posturing towards the sinners, but I don't know. Something just feels off. My spidey senses are tingling, man. I don't like all of our information coming from Dain. Dain says the sinners didn't stop the disaster. The sibling says Dain didn't stop the disaster. We need another fucking source, man. However, we do. The Sustainer's voice lines about the arrogation of mankind perfectly aligns with the sinners grabbing at the Abyss, as that is, in its rawest form, mankind's arrogation.